Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to walk you through something that might completely change the way you look at XRP. So not hype, not rumors. I'm talking about the real math, the real liquidity problem that the world is facing, and why big institutions are quietly preparing for a scenario where XRP becomes absolutely essential. So let's start with this. The IMF recently announced that the global debt is now sitting at 235% of the world's GDP. That's insane. And what that really means, that massive liquidity crisis is building. Right now, the world is short by nearly 27 trillion in available liquidity. Now pause for a second and think about this. If the global system moves toward a single natural asset to bridge liquidity between banks and currencies, XRP actually fits that role almost perfectly. And here's where it gets interesting. If banks around the world start depending on XRP for liquidity, they would need around 62 billion XRP to operate smoothly. But there are only about 60 billion XRP circulating today, and the supply can never increase, ever. So now you see the problem, right? If big institutions begin accumulating XRP the same way they accumulate dollars or gold or bonds, retail investors may never see that supply again, not because someone is stealing it, but because the financial system literally needs it to function. But let me ask you something that most crypto investors never think about. What happens when banks and financial institutions are required, not asked? Required not hold XRP on their balance sheets. What happens to price? What happens to supply? What happens to liquidity? Most people think a supply shock means the price goes up quickly. That's not the real definition. A real supply shock happens when XRP is being used for so many payments at the same time that the tokens are tied up in transactions and temporarily disappear from circulation. So, and believe it or not, we are already seeing early signs of this. OTL transactions are rising. XRP used for settlements doesn't always return to the market immediately. ETFs now want on-chain XRP, not IOUs. Demand of increase in multiple directions at once. Now imagine this. Imagine 10 or 12 crypto ETFs and global custodians and a few major banks all accumulating XRP at the same time. How much supply is left for the average retail investor who is waiting for a dip? It's like a rocket. Once it takes off, it's not coming back to pick up the passengers, who arrived late. Now let's zoom out for a moment because the world's financial system is completely broken. Back in 2018, Ripple told everyone that 5 trillion was sitting frozen in Nostro-Vostro accounts just to support cross-border payments. Today, that number is closer to 27 trillion. $27 trillion doing nothing except waiting to settle payments. So imagine this. If banks migrate even a small percentage of that frozen capital into XRP, the value of XRP doesn't need to be guessed. It can be calculated. So let's walk through it together simply and naturally, okay? Take 5% of 27 trillion. That's roughly 1.35 trillion. Now divide that by the available XRP supply, about 54 billion XRP. Once you account for lost and locked tokens, that gives you a price around $25 per XRP. That's just with 5% migration. If 10% of global liquidity moves to XRP, you're looking at the 49 USD per XRP. If the entire Nostro-Vostro system gets replaced with literally Ripple-built XRP for the numbers crosses 500 per XRP. And again, that is not prediction. It's a straight mathematical model based on liquidity demand. And when people say only a few banks will use XRP, I just smile because that's not true at all. There are more than 10,000 commercial banks, 1,000 plus central banks and monetary authorities, 500 major fintech companies, and dealing with global settlements every single day. So Ripple isn't targeting a handful of banks. Ripple is targeting the entire plumbing of the financial world. And here's the part almost nobody talks about. Brad Garlinghouse has openly said that XRP was designed to operate at the scale of a global reserve currency, not because it's replaceable the dollar, but because it fits the technical definition of neutral, fast, scalable settlement asset, something every country can use without political friction. So this is exactly why IMF created SDRs, but SDRs rely on old systems. They're slow, they're outdated, and they still depend on Nostro-Vostro accounts. XRP fixes every single one of those limitations. Now let's talk about something that shocked people. Tier 1 banks, the 200 biggest banks in the world, move between 5 and 50 billion every day. To operate on XRP rails without friction, each would need at least 100 million XRP. Do the math. 200 banks times 100 million XRP, 20 billion XRP permanently absorbed. Mid-tier banks need around 10 million each. That's another 20 million XRP. Smaller banks, payment providers, and monetary institutions absorb the rest, bringing the total to about 48 million XRP. That disappears into global plumbing. So retail investors will never see that supply again, not because someone locked it, but because the world's financial system literally needs it to function. At that point, XRP isn't speculative crypto anymore. It becomes an institutional liquidity tool, a bridge asset that cannot be frozen, controlled, or manipulated by any single country. And if XRP ever becomes part of the SDR-style liquidity basket, banks won't choose to hold XRP. They will have to hold it. So, here's my question to you. After hearing the math, the liquidity structure, the institutional demand, and the direction global regulations are moving, do you think XRP can evolve into a global reserve-grade asset? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want you to where you can stand. If you enjoy deep reads, art-based breakdowns like this one, make sure you subscribe because the world of XRP is changing fast, and when it finally takes off, it won't look back.